Subscribe, motherfucker.
What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. Make sure that you are subscribed. I've got over 200 videos now of live production and sound design and neuro stuff, and yeah. So today we're actually going to be talking about one of my favorite genres that I don't really make anymore. It's called kind of like progressive breaks, progressive breakbeat or atmospheric breakbeat, something of that sort. And let's go ahead and see what it sounds like. So if you like that kind of sound, then stick around. I'm going to be talking about all of the layers that constitute this. But before I get started, I kind of just want to talk about the overall idea about what goes behind atmospheric or progressive breaks in the first place. You'll notice that like the drums that I have aren't hitting as hard as how I usually like them to be. And that's just because this kind of aesthetic is meant to be a little bit easier to listen to, if that makes sense. It's more about taking you on a journey as opposed to like being like the hardest hitting, you know, style where people would actually, you know what I mean, b-boy to that stuff. I come from that world and I know that world very well, and nobody ever listens to atmospheric breaks when they either battle or when they're working on dancing or even power moves. So with that being said, the workflow idea behind this that I would suggest that works really well for this is doing the super loop. And that's where you start with the drum break and you keep layering as many, you know, cool layers as you possibly can to where like they're all playing at once, because at one point or another within progressive breaks, it's going to like pretty much have almost, if not all, of the layers playing at once. And then once you do that, all you have to do is kind of take those bits and pieces and then spread them out in that way. So for me, this is kind of like the super loop aspect of that, and that's why everything is kind of stacked together at once and it's not arranged. But now that you have this, it's like it's going to be a lot easier for you to pull those elements out and then add other things to kind of supplement that. It's not the only way to do that, but there it is. So let's go ahead and talk about the drums. They sound like this. Sorry, those are the sidechain layers. These are the main drums. And it's nothing too special. This kick was made, how was this kick made? Just by, I think I just took a regular kick sample this time, which I usually don't do that, but it's just kind of like punchy and almost kind of sounds like a 909-ish. And this kind of works really well because this kind of helps cut through the mix a little bit better as opposed to just having a really hard subby kick. And keep in mind that whenever you work with faster tempos, I know that this says 70, but the way that it's being played is actually more so of like 140, almost like double time, right? But if you have kind of a punchier kick that has a resonant point that's a little bit higher in the frequency range, then it opens up more space for the bass. And not only that, but it's easier to hear whenever you're trying to play this on big speakers and all that stuff, or small speakers for that matter. So the snare is 3 layers, and layering is like, I used to be really afraid of layering when I was first making music because I didn't want to do that. I just wanted one sample for everything else. But I kind of find that there's a lot more fun in building kind of like your own custom snares or claps or whatever to create that kind of thing. And a lot of times they end up serving different purposes. So for one, like having a solid fundamental right here for this regular snare probably makes a lot of sense. I think it might actually be the clap. So that's kind of what's in center, and that's kind of the transient aspect of that. And then the other stuff that's kind of surrounding all that stuff is just to make it have a little bit more beef and then maybe a little bit more stereo information. And it doesn't have to have a layer like this. It's pretty easy for you to find something along the sort of that. But if you find the right samples, you don't really have to do a lot of processing to them. However, some good rules of thumb is that for your kick, for this particular kind of music, if you're going to do EQ, like you might want to roll off everything around 40-ish. And then for the snare, like take out everything that's below the fundamental point, because there's usually like this little mountain slope. Just kind of remove that in that sense. As far as the beat goes, like really just beatbox. And I messed up. For these little hits right here, for these shorter kicks, sometimes it makes sense to make these a little bit more quiet because that way it makes the drum track seem a little bit more dynamic and it doesn't necessarily have to be like 100% velocity. And that's something I think is overlooked in a lot of different forms of music in general, of like people thinking that your kick and snare have to be like 100% velocity every time. It's just not true. And it also depends on what your genre is. It makes sense in house. Even then in house, usually there's ghost hits, which would kind of constitute what I'm talking about. But, you know, like spice it up. Try to make it seem like you're actually like having this groove. And the more that you do that, where you play with dynamics of the track and also rhythm, the more that it's going to seem like it's groovy, right? And then at the end of every 4 bars or something, I usually have some kind of turnaround. But that will get to the second part of this. So the way that I'm mixing this is everything is going through a single sidechain layer, and that's just right here. And for the attack and release, it's very short because we don't want something to sound like it's pumping too hard, especially because we have a lot of transients in here. But let's go ahead and talk about this group, which I think is the percussive aspect of this. Let me see what this is. Yeah, okay. So I've used a couple of loops on this one. I'm not sure where I got these from, but what I've done on this in particular, which sounds like this, is just add a little bit of clipping, which I don't really even think is necessary because the clipper isn't even hitting on that, so that was probably a mistake of mine. But that gives it a nice little shuffle. This thing is, I believe, the shaker. Yeah, and so one important thing whenever you're doing kind of polyrhythm in that aspect is you really want to make sure that you're not just layering 16 and 32 notes on top of everything. I mean, you can do it, but that takes away from the potential like groove or the spaces that people can catch whenever you're doing that. And if you've ever seen somebody like dance to like breakbeat or something, and or like even popping, it's really amazing because they really kind of hear those specific rhythms that they catch in between all that, and those are the kinds of opportunities that you want to open up for somebody. So for this in particular, instead of just doing 32 notes, break it up sometimes and leave a little bit of space, and that will create a more complex groove. And this tip right here is also applicable to anything regarding the whole break world. So jungle, especially jungle, drum and bass, even halftime music, all that stuff. So take that if you're kind of a beginner. If you're moderately advanced or intermediate, then you probably already know this. Having a consistent rhythm, on the other hand, can be sometimes helpful because it makes your whole layer group sound like it's a little bit stronger. But even with this, one little trick that I'm doing that's pretty cool is I'm actually using a tool with steppers on here that is automating the volume of the gain. And it's very subtle, but you should be able to hear it to where there's a little bit of hat difference. So again, instead of just having that drill of eighth notes on this in particular, I'm actually having everything kind of play at different velocities in order to give space for the other percussive elements to play. So that's where all that comes in. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the drums. It's not too complicated. It's more of just setting up a rhythm that goes well. Whenever you do hats and stuff, you do like, I didn't really talk about much about how to EQ your hats and how to space them all out and stuff because there's not really a lot of rules with that. It's just kind of what sounds good. But the next thing that we have is the bass, I believe. Yeah. So that's just a cool little bass line. But what I have here is a simple Reese bass. And what's going on here is there is a detuned saw wave. And for this, like, there's a bunch of different ways to make Reese basses, of course. But for this one, I opted more for kind of like the wall of sound type Reese, to where if I were to play this at a higher octave, you wouldn't hear the phase oscillation. But within this, sometimes, like, because you have everything filling up, it makes it seem like it's a harder sound. And so I've got everything spread out right here with these sounds, and then I've got a fundamental that's a little bit more quiet. That way I've actually got sub under this. And then one of the like key elements that I can tell you about shaping your Reese basses, even if it's a low pass one, is using a notch filter, because this will change the timbre of it like so much. I actually like that. But as you can see, cutting around the low mids will make a huge difference to this, so try to keep that in mind. So after that, I've got a little bit of distortion here, and that's just kind of making that a little bit beefier. And then of course we've got our low pass filter because we don't want the high stuff to interfere with the instrumentation stuff that we have up top. Now, to make this a little bit wider, I've split this into frequencies, and on the low end, we are putting the stereo in mono, or sorry, we're putting the low end in mono. And then on the high band, we're adding just a touch of chorus, so that way it doesn't sound like it's all the way through the middle. Now, the last thing that I've got is just a little bit of limiting, and then that's pretty much it for that bass patch. And then with breakbeats, you can kind of just, you know, do sustained notes, and it's really easy to write bass lines in that way. Okay, so the next thing that we've got is kind of like that acid square. This one's actually really cool, and you can arguably use this as a bass, and I think that I did at first, but it didn't really work out in the way that I had hoped, so there's that. Now, this isn't as complicated as it looks. What I'm doing here is just taking a sine wave and then adding just a touch of FM via a square wave, and then all of these are actually the same. So once you just set one up, then all you have to do is duplicate this 3 times. But what I've done is taken a nonlinear filter and added an envelope to it, and this is actually what gives it that kind of sound. And one thing that you can do that makes this really fun is that if you push the resonance up really high with the drive, especially on the nonlinear filter, then it will actually turn your sine wave into sounding kind of like a square in that way. And so I'm doing both distortion and filtering on these in order to make them sound that way. Now there's a dedicated filter right here, just to kind of give it that. And what am I doing here? This is notching some stuff out, just to take out some of those low mids right here. And then the delay aspect of it is kind of just playing in the background. Now, because we've got that Reese bass, I'm trying to focus more so on pulling up the midband and then taking out the lows without like completely removing it, and then pulling it up with the limiter. So that way, like, this is still kind of bassy in some cases. So I want to be able to make sure that I can play the Reese bass along with this at the same time. And that's kind of what makes those work. So remember that mixing is kind of like jigsawing in some cases, or blending rather. So if you're trying to get these two elements to play together, then start taking out frequencies from each one and make them match. Which I think this can be tweaked, but it's not terrible. So the next thing I've got is this little cool chord thing. And this is just kind of like a motion. If you've seen my tutorials on how to make like soundscapes and stuff, then that would be a lot easier for you to follow. But pretty much what this is a pad that I've made. And this is kind of a longer patch, so I'm going to skim through this. But the way that this works is that I've set up a fundamental that comes in every once in a while, which is right here. And then over the top, you'll see that these things are kind of moving together in such a way at random. And so if you have a bunch of waves that are detuned or like kind of make a chord, and then you pull them in at random and you make them come in really slow, then you can kind of create this complex pad in that way. After that, knowing that in mind, you can start to filter those and then run them through different processing chains. So on this one, we're randomizing kind of like just a sine wave with a little bit of sync, and then you can see that there's a filter moving. Then we've got some other groups that are doing some, that looks like a drum pad, that's to the high pass. This would probably be dedicated to a separate video, but what you can do is take a look at my other video, which I'll link you to in the cards, of how to make pads with neural processing, and that's exactly what this is in that sense. But I will kind of open everything up so you can kind of see, just to try to make something like that. And yeah, so this is just a chorus, or sorry, this is just a choir with high pass stuff, and you'll see that like almost everything except for the main fundamental is high pass, so that way it creates space. Let's go ahead and take a look at what's in here. This is just something super simple where I'm making sure that the stereo end is in mono, pulling the lows down a bit, some notch filtering, chorus. This is just kind of introducing a little bit more movement on the top end, so that way it will seem like an octave is coming in from time to time. Let's see what this one is. This one is just delay stuff, so delays that are coming in with pitch shifting just for extra movement, nothing crazy. And then this one is making sure that the low end is in mono, and then adding another instance of delay with reverb over the top. I would argue that like I really don't need to have that many filters and stuff on here for this, but it just came out the way that it did. So for this in particular, I wanted to make sure that I'm cutting the bass frequencies from this. Oh, okay, yeah, now I see what I'm doing. And then for this lane in particular, if we solo this, let me go ahead and turn off this filter so you can actually hear what this is doing on the top end. So this is being sent to the master, or being sent to lane 3. And then for this one, this has different kind of characteristics. That's more so focused on the mids and the lows. Yeah. And then together they're combining in such a way that kind of creates that pad, which is kind of redundant because I've ended up low passing it anyways, but I think that I made this patch a long time ago and then just pulled it up to try to make it work. But for this in particular, this is a pitch shifter, and then if you see these orange things, it's all being randomized, but it's got some delay on it, some compression, some distortion, again, filtering on the low ends, making sure that the bass is in mono, then chorus on the move. Yeah, everything in the middle is just being pretty much stereoized in some way or another. Bandpass movement, distortion, ring mod, that's going to give it kind of like that fluttering sound, and then this is just kind of a creative notch with some limiting. If you guys are interested in these kinds of patches or these kinds of processes, I have this thing called Eternum that has like generators and basses and stuff, and most of these that you'll see here with these crazy like racks are from that, so there's a link to that in the description. But at the end, there is an OTT, kind of Ocarina of Time, cheeky, right? You can just go to Overachiever and turn the mix down to half with 3 bands. And then this is just, again, making sure the low end is in mono, even though we're taking it out. And then we've got a little bit of compression and then a little bit of limiting. I'm pretty sure that the compressor just has, just pull the threshold down. So that was probably the most complicated thing of this entire project. And it's also overkill, but if you know how to make cool phasey pads, then just add a nice phasey pad and write some easy chord progressions that don't need to be too complicated. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the choir part of this, which is a little bit easier. Nothing crazy, but I heard this one song from Tom Middleton called Shinkansen, which is, I think, the subway in Japan. That's kind of how I learned, or how I tried to copy this. But what you do is you take a choir sample. This one is Gregorian. It's actually like a stock one. And I guess you can cover that for just EQ shaping. But what you do is you kind of like drench it with a phaser and flanger and then put some reverb on it. And what ends up happening is it ends up phasing like that. Like it's just like transforming. And I just really like that sound. That's just like one of my personal like pocket sounds that I really enjoy making. We do have some EQ right here. This is mid-side EQing, so on the mids, we're giving a little bit of space right there, and then on the sides, we're cutting it a little bit harder. It's an easy way to get some kind of like stereo information out of it. And then I've got a trance gate on it that I'm activating over time. So it'll start. It's got a nice swell, and then for that second bar, it's doing that that trance gating. And then that just kind of adds a little bit of atmosphere to the outside of that. All right, next thing that we've got. This is another kind of vocal type thing with another trance gate on it, but this is just a sample that I think I pulled in. Yeah, from my sample library, so you can find any vocal. The only thing that you need to keep in mind with this is that you want to try to tune it. And you don't have to like tune it exactly. Like either try to find a 5th or a 7th of that, and that will be easier to find. So most of the time, if you like don't know what the key of a sample is, you can just pitch it up 5 semitones, 7 semitones, and it'll at least sound like it's in harmony with that. Doesn't always work. Try it though. So yeah, this is just has a long attack. And then again, I'm kind of just taking out some of that stuff. This might even be a duplicate patch. Yeah, I think it is. Instead of the phaser flanger, I've just got a little bit of a chorus with the reverb that's playing a higher thing. And so this just kind of gives it like a nice little like fluttering. And I kind of like how this is sustained and this is transgated all the way through, and then they kind of meet in between, or like meet on the second bar. It's just a nice little touch for me. So this little thing right here is the final thing that we should talk about, I believe. And this is that cool little arpeggiator that we've got. Yeah, so for this is just the arpeggiator settings to where this is at 0, probably 5. What was this? 7, and 12, minus 12, 24, minus 12. And keeping it kind of simple in that way of not trying to do like a crazy super nuts melody kind of gives it that cool, like, it's got that seventh in there, but it also has the octaves, and that kind of makes it sound pretty nice. But this is going up and down. So you kind of just play a melody with that and then kind of make it work in the way that you want it to. But as far as the actual sound goes, it's really simple. It's just a triangle wave, and I'm making sure that I didn't do anything else to it. Yeah, it's just a triangle wave with a little bit of reverb. Really like it though. It sounds really good. And then again, some mid-side EQing. So yeah, I think that we talked about all the instrumentation in here and kind of like the philosophy about how to put this stuff together. The hardest part of this tune was really just making this pad that is probably actually like the least like prominent anyways. And this might even just have been a preset or something. But with all that being said, I don't think that this is one of the more difficult genres to make as long as you know how to create a vibe. And so like really like you can just create like one chord and like one single like sustaining bass line, a boom, 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 or something like that, and I'll put it on with a breakbeat. And it should be pretty easy to achieve even if it doesn't sound exactly like this. And also keep in mind that like this isn't my like genre of choice, and while I'm doing these genre things of like making these tunes because I've got more planned, like take it with a grain of salt because like this isn't what I do every day, right? I try to just like take the essence of what I'm doing and then try to incorporate it in that sense. So if you did all that like we did, hopefully it was easy enough to follow. There's nothing else that's crazy going on. It should sound like this. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching my content. I really appreciate it. I always have fun doing this kind of stuff. And if you have a genre that you want me to do, I know that there's a comment section on my YouTube channel about that. But if you can think of something different, then let me know. Or if you have any tips that you want to incorporate that you do for this kind of music, please let me know as well, because I'm here to learn too, right? Be sure to subscribe. If you're not already, turn your bell notifications on. I think I was going to tell you something else, but I can't remember. Thank you guys so much for watching my content. I will see you in the next one.